been following the housing crisis closely here on Forum Daily. And for Canadians, it feels with each passing day that housing, both buying and renting, is becoming more unaffordable. Some have even argued that a whole generation is now priced out of the market entirely. And while there is near universal agreement that there is a problem that needs to be solved, there is growing debate on the best path forward. One of the more popular suggestions is a national public housing buildout. But our next guest has some doubts about the feasibility of this plan. Joining us now to discuss the costs associated with a national public housing buildout is independent policy specialist Josef Filipowicz. Josef, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show.
Before we get into the criticism of the proposed public housing buildout, can you explain to us what exactly that is and what it entails?
Well, as you said, there's broad agreement on what the problem is, which is that there's a huge shortage of housing, right? There's a massive imbalance between demand and supply. So we need a lot more housing. And some folks argue that the way to get there is to for government to take a leading role in building out these units, right? So the market can't necessarily get us there. The government needs to do it for us. So what did we do in our analysis with my colleague Steve Lafleur and I? We took this idea seriously. We wanted to really dig into the numbers and see what this might cost.
Yeah, so on that point, you've estimated the price tag on such a plan at between 196 and $300 billion. How is the figure calculated and why is it so high?
Well, actually, in many ways, that's an underestimate, right? So you're right to say these are huge numbers, but we always erred towards the side of caution and the most conservative possible estimates when working through this, when working through our estimates. So that includes, land costs, taxes, construction costs, the number of units needed. On every single one of these assumptions, we always erred towards the most caution possible and the most conservative estimates, so that we could really, give this idea the benefit of the doubt, and yet we still end up with $200 to $300 billion, which is staggering.
So it definitely is. So how does that price figure compare to other major programs the federal government spends money on, like healthcare?
Well, actually, at this point, we're beyond individual budget items for the federal government. I mean, over the past decade or so, entire federal government budgets range in the $300 billion. So we're talking, this roughly the size of a federal budget. That's how big we're talking here.
Wow. In terms of Canada's housing shortfall, how many homes do we need to build and in what time frame?
So for our analysis, we again went to a more conservative estimate. We went with what StatsCan calls core housing needs. So it's an indicator of how many households are falling below a threshold of affordability or of adequacy, and that still gets us 1.5 million households that need better homes. But if you were to ask, CMHC or others, you could get far larger numbers. Like CMHC estimates that between now and 2030, we're going to need 5.8 million homes if we want to close that gap.
That's a lot of homes. And what is the right policy approach to overcome that shortfall, if not a public housing build out? What other tools does the government have at its disposal to get homes built?
Well, it's a good question. And what we really wanted to do here was, to set aside the idea that government can lead this, not necessarily because it's a good or a bad idea. That's not the point. It's just we can't afford it. So really, the private sector is going to have to take a leading role here. And I think they can. And instead of looking at the spending levers that governments have, maybe governments can do a bit more introspection and look at what they're doing to hold back housing projects, what they could do to get out of the way so that more housing can get built faster, so that we can reach these enormous targets that, by the way, are unprecedented.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming here on Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me on the show.